Thank you for joining us, everybody. Galen and I are happy to join you here from sunny Southern California. So hopefully the weather's decent where you are. You're not dealing with too much other stuff. But as was mentioned, we're definitely going to talk about some things that Galen and I have learned over the years of doing live events and webinars and Teams meetings, and just some tips and tricks to be able to improve the experience. So I know we've got this, and you've probably seen this throughout the whole conference, and we'll definitely be showing it at the end as well. But definitely provide feedback. One of those things that helps us to be able to become better speakers, do a better job with these sessions, is feedback from you. So if there's something that you liked, cool, let us know. If there's something you didn't like, also let us know. That's how we can make improvements. Also, if there's something that you don't like that we can fix right away, as in you can't hear me very well, or I got something funky on my head, go ahead and put that in chat and let us know, and we can resolve those immediately. Otherwise, we don't know what you don't tell us. So definitely happy to be here.
Awesome. And just to dovetail onto that, if we talk about anything that you want to hear more about, put that in the review as well, because we're constantly tweaking the session to align it more with what you want to hear. So my name is Galen Keene, and I first want to give a big shout out to all the organizers in making this conference happen. This is one of the top events of the year, and so happy to be here and part of the Teams Nation community. My name is Galen Keene. I function primarily as a collaboration architect, working as a CEO and architect of LionTech, a consultancy out on the West Coast of the US in California. Work very closely with the community. So I'm the president of the San Diego Microsoft 365 Productivity Group. That's our location on Meetup. So if you'd like to join us in our meetings, please hit up our Meetup site, join our group. Our sessions are, of course, remote, and as we look to go back into physical sessions, they will be hybrid, as Ryan and I will be bringing all of those inline and in person. So hope to see you there.
So yeah, my name's Ryan Scouten. I've been working with SharePoint for a long time. I've always loved kind of dabbling in technology. So started playing with some stuff with Stream and streaming and all quite a few years ago. And I was like, okay, fell in love this stuff. As was mentioned, I'm also a Microsoft MVP in Office Apps and Services, a certified trainer. The company I currently work for is Zilio, a great company. We do migrations, so file migrations. And what we specialize in is the complex migrations that most companies don't want to touch. So it doesn't really relate too much to what we're talking about today, but it's a great company, and their process will make your life a lot easier because we do all the nasty stuff people don't want to deal with. So definitely happy to be here today, and we'll have some fun talking about some ways we can help you make your guys' lives easier.
All right, so talking about the agenda, what are we going to cover? We'll go through this real quick so that we can get right to it. We want to talk about out-of-box features and make sure that we're all level set on, gosh, what is Teams doing right away for us? Some things you might not know about, and some things that you should definitely take advantage of. Then we're going to go into OBS, and we're going to give you an overview of that. We're going to walk through some things, some foundational concepts to empower you, and conclude that with some pro tips, both, what you need to be mindful of, some gotchas, as well as some things that will make your life much easier. And of course, there's a Q&A on the back end of this, but as Ryan said, please feel free to bring up in chat if you can't hear us, but also bring up in chat if you have a question, and we'll be able to tag team that and get a response to you. All right, without further ado.
All right, yeah, so first things, like Gabe mentioned, we're trying to describe, here are some cool things that Microsoft is actually implementing now. And so we kind of tried to stick with a guideline of a lot of the features we're going to be talking about are things that are coming out or in the next few months or have already come out. So one of the first things that's already out now that a lot of people may have missed is the ability to present in Teams directly from PowerPoint. And so the beauty of what this does is it gets you the ability to go in and in PowerPoint, you hit the present in Teams button, and then everything just works. It all ties up into Teams. You do also get the ability to do the, I forget exactly what they call the feature, but you can say, hey, I want my overlays. You want kind of more like a TV studio style mode. So it definitely got some really cool stuff. Was watching a streaming session by John Moore, who's actually here today. They tested out audio, and one of the perks of doing a video in Teams and like from the present in Teams and PowerPoint is all the audio just comes through. You don't have to remember, oh, did I check that button to say, hey, I want to include system audio? It all just comes through. So present in Teams is a beautiful thing to make your presentations a lot smoother.
No doubt. Next up, breakout room changes. There we go. So I'm sure many of you, especially if you do workshop type events, are aware of breakout room changes. Great new features allowing you to extend the management of the breakout rooms to specific presenters. This has really been out since the tail end of last year and is dropping, I believe, this month. I haven't checked to see if it's there in DoD and GCC High, but definitely if you're using breakout rooms, super good improvements here to the management of those rooms to distribute that load.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff comes really handy if whether you're dealing with an education style situation where you have multiple people, or prime case events like this, to be able to say, hey, I want to delegate to have this person be able to manage breakout rooms. So much nicer. So this next one we got is we're starting a live event. For anybody that's done a live event, Galen and I did a couple years ago now almost, we did a virtual marathon. Teams live events were very new and very young. We were able to pull it off. We stressed out and pretty much brought Teams live events to its knees at one point in time in the beginning. But with that, it was early in COVID timeframe, so we were able to say, hey, Microsoft was able to see, okay, here's what the problem is, and so they made adjustments, and I think that's been beneficial for all of us. And one of those feedback things that we saw is this feature here right now, is that when we mentioned to them, it's like, hey, as part of this event, if you are doing a live event, you have your producer, they can hit the end button, which in the beginning of the time, it was the predominantly red big button on there. So it's easy. You're in a Teams meeting, you think, okay, I need to leave. I hit the red button. So we can't tell you how many sessions we had where somebody was leaving, like, okay, our moderators, we had a moderator shift, whatever. So they hit the end button, and then we had to scramble because it was final. As soon as you hit end live event, everything stopped. And so we had to recreate new rooms, do all that. So the beauty of this is now that's not a problem. So we can just say, okay, somebody ended it, fine. We'll start back up again. All the links still work, everything works, everybody can come back in, and we're off and running. So definitely a very welcome change. And that is definitely out now. I've demoed it in one of the presentations I did back in December. So I can confirm that one we can take advantage of at this point.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how welcome of a change that is to not have to recreate a new room and move everyone over to it. All right, another really cool feature, virtual green room. This is great, for whether you're doing an event within your enterprise and you need to bring in some people and just have them get prepared, right? Have that conversation that we were having before this session with the moderators. Have that happen where the attendees are not hearing and seeing all of us get prepared. Pretty cool capability. And in addition to that, well, what does an attendee see? Well, they see a welcome screen. They see something really cool that lets them know that they are where they intended to go. And then likewise, all of the speakers can share content and just get prepped for the session that's about to begin.
Yeah, it makes it very easy to be able to do your content checks, your audio checks, make sure everybody has their cameras up. So a lot of the stuff that you all had to deal with just because we're all in the same room right now. But it's just one of those things, if you're doing like a professional webinar or one of those things where you don't want to expose people, that really nice functionality to say, hey, we're going to take this offline, verify it, and then when you're ready, you just roll, and they're none the wiser.
Yeah. So this we'll kind of come back to this in a little bit when we get to pro tips. Ryan and I have developed a method for getting around this pre-virtual green room point of time where we kind of create this green room for speakers in our professionally produced sessions. So we'll come back to that in pro tips.
And then Galen, we do have a question here from, looks like Pascal. Well, Prudent Pascal EVA group. So we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation, basically talking about what is the best way to play a video in meetings. We're going to talk about some different options. And so we'll definitely cover that point. So carrying on the new controls. So this is one of those things that gives you as a meeting organizer the ability to control more about what's on the screen. So that way you can say, hey, we've got all of these presenters ready and rolling, but we only want, for example, if we wanted Dimitar to be able to do the introductions, and then he can swap over and bring Galen and my video back on screen. Or if we want to say, hey, for a certain part of this presentation, I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking, so Galen can move himself off to the side, and it's just you're looking at me. And then, or vice versa. So the ability to be able to control, say, hey, we've got this content, I want to bring it on now, or then we can cycle off somebody else. So that definitely allows you to say, hey, I want to bring this on to focus on specific content that matters.
All right, co-organizers. This is big. Shared workload, distributed workload. You can imagine, for Teams Nation, all of the different rooms, all of the work that goes into preparing for this, and being able to have something as simple as a co-organizer to manage meeting options and to help with the prep for the actual meeting that's going to take place. So this is really cool, especially from a live event perspective. That capability of having a co-organizer, that role didn't exist previously. So this is a very big one, like I said, for distributing some of the setup tasks and being able to organize multiple meetings or events that might be happening simultaneously.
Or even just the concept of you have a regularly scheduled webinar, you have a regularly scheduled meeting that goes on that is your quarterly review, for example. The ability to be able to say, hey, Galen, I want you to be able to also tackle anything that I'm doing on this, even though I'm the one scheduling it. So say, for example, heaven forbid, I go out on vacation during one of the quarterly updates. That would be irresponsible of me because I know those updates will be ahead of time. But for example, say I break a leg or something happens to me and I'm not able to make it. With the co-organizer, Galen can now take over and do pretty much everything I can do with that event and with that series and be good to go. So think of also common situations. You have a teacher, you have a co-teacher, a sub, you have executive assistants. There are a lot of different scenarios where the ability to allow someone else to manage these meetings without actually having to share credentials and all that is just a beautiful thing. All right, so Q&A for Teams meetings, there's a public preview on that right now. Essentially what it is, it allows you to be able to, in the Teams meeting, there's an app that you can add that allows question and answer. So it's very similar to what you would get in a live event. You can now take advantage of that in regular meetings, in webinars as well. So that way you can do the questions, do the moderation and all that. So good stuff.
All right, and we've got detect music automatically. So really big one if you're a remote worker or you like to work from coffee shops or other places that might have some music in the background and you're joining a meeting. What you'll experience is Teams prompting you. Is this music that should be suppressed? And if yes, you can suppress it. Why would you not suppress it? Well, what if you're taking a virtual music lesson, right? A private music lesson. Very common nowadays. It wasn't common maybe pre-COVID, but this is definitely a big one. I know my son is looking forward to this. So it's dropping soon, this particular one.
Yeah, and the ability to be able to even, as long with that, be able to, like Galen said, to be able to specify this content is music that I actually care about, just like the full music sound is one of those features that's out now. So that way you can specify, hey, the audio that I'm passing through for my meeting, don't worry about clipping it. Don't worry about doing any of that stuff. This is music. I'm okay with it. This is intentional. So that way it kind of helps improve your audio bit rates even, so you get better quality if you're streaming content through. Per the question about, okay, playing a video, that's definitely one of those features that comes in handy. So if your video has some audio with it, it just comes through at full fidelity. Let's see. We have a question here. Seeing as Q&A is Yammer based, do you know if there'll be a connect to this Q&A to Yammer community? So if you want to be able to Q&A more persistent. I have not heard anything along those lines. And so I'm not 100% sure on if they'll connect it to the Yammer community on that one. For Peter, your question, are there release numbers for each of these features? Yes. So as part of this presentation, when we release it, we have in the notes the actual Microsoft 365 roadmap IDs that will link you directly to, so you can keep track of, hey, this is one I care about. When is it coming out? So we'll definitely, when we share the deck out, that'll have that information.
And keep checking back on those, because some of the ones that we thought would already be out have been delayed a little bit. So you'll want to keep on top of that. All right.
Also, he's asking about Co-Organizer. That feature ID is 81391. Let's put that in here. 81. Where'd it go? 391.
And I am seeing in my tenant some Co-Organizer, but this is not one of my corporate tenants that I typically work in. So, well, yeah, you'll need to check.
Yeah, and one of those things as well is, even if it's in the process of rolling out, you may just have to keep an eye out of when it actually appears in your tenant, because they have the staggered release schedules. So it may show up in your tenant, and then or it may show up in someone else's tenant and you don't have it yet. So it's kind of just check back in. Once they start saying rolling out, that means you should be getting it within the next month or so.
All right, so we want to move on to OBS, Open Broadcaster Software. This is, definitely leveling up, right? This is outside of Microsoft Teams. So think about everything we just spoke about that Microsoft has on offer, in addition to all the other features of Teams that you're already aware of, and then layer on top of that OBS. What can you do with OBS? Well, first, you don't have to pay for OBS, so that's nice. And this is an open source product, right? So you can use it to record video, to live stream, using multiple sources. We'll talk about that, many effects. And like I said, this can sit to the side or sit on top of Teams. You can really use this to bring to bear a bunch of additional capabilities that you might find more in a professional environment, like a newsroom, as an example.
And yeah, so another example is a lot of the official, like Twitch streamers, all those people who do a lot of the live streaming. This is pretty much the de facto standard.
Yeah. So yeah, if you go to Twitch, and there's some great resources in the Microsoft space that are on Twitch that make even online coding fun to participate in, all using this software. And in that software, there are kind of three primary components that we'll talk about: scenes, sources, and outputs. So we're about to dive into those, but keep in mind that those are kind of the framework of what's going to make OBS successful for you.
All right, so yeah,
start now. Kick it off with the scenes. Yeah.
I got distracted by John posted a comment there, like, oh, yep, OBS is just brilliant. So the basic thing you're going to interact with a lot in OBS are the scenes. So the scene allows you to group your content. A lot of times, one of the cool things you can do as well is you can nest different scenes within each other. So you could set up a scene, which is your collection of different sources, your content you want to show, set it all up, and then you can say, hey, in this other scene, I want to include this content. So say you got your person, you got your lower thirds, you got their camera, you got whatever, and you got the little logos or what have you, and then it's all just there. You say, okay, now I want to show this scene, and by showing that particular source as a scene, all of a sudden everything now just shows up, but it's all consistent. So that way, if you want to reuse that same setup in other scenes, you don't have to configure them all the same. You just say, oh, include this one, and it's off and running. Also, the beauty is you can share these with other people. Not super easy, but they do come in a collection, so you can kind of group things together. But also, as part of what was Gail and I worked on some of these events, what we've done is we actually try and work to have a similar folder structure. So that way, as I do an export of a scene, I can share it out to him, he can pick it up, and you're off and running. So definitely some cool stuff there. And we'll look at how you work with some of those scenes later. All right, sources. So these are the main things about how you get things, the things you care about into OBS is the source. So your sources, as we have a list here, you got your audio, you got a browser, so you can load up a browser page that actually has whatever content you want on it, and it'll just show up inside your stuff. You got video capture devices. So for example, camera we're looking at, video capture device. One of the things we're looking at today, there's also a video capture card, so you can pull in an HDMI source, what have you. You also do images, scenes, all sorts of stuff. And then NDI is actually really cool. Allows you to do like professional studio grade content from anything on your network. So you could have a camera that's just sitting off on the other side of the room, but it's streaming its content over NDI and you can pull it in. And even Teams allows the ability to broadcast this meeting over NDI. Then you can now pull that into OBS and live stream it if you want, or adjust it. And one of the techniques we talk about, we're going to be using that a little bit, mentioning that a little bit later about how we can take advantage of NDI.
That's that pro tip I was talking about briefly when we were discussing the green room feature that's upcoming. So again, just to connect that to the beginning, we'll talk about that shortly.
Yeah, and as we mentioned before, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the outputs, but you can stream out to anything you want. You can stream out to another screen even that's connected to your machine. You can stream out to stream. You can record it to disk. There's a lot of different options there, but don't need to spend a whole lot of time because it's just fairly basic. But just good to know that there are different options, and the different options are not exclusive either. One of the options is there is an output that is a virtual camera. So you could output a virtual camera directly into Teams. Teams you select as if it was your camera, and voila, you're off and running.
All right, so we've provided you this overview of OBS, but I think now it's time to go ahead and crack OBS open and start taking a look at some of these components. So Ryan's going to walk us through some of his screens, and we'll start taking a look at various setups and source and scene creation and management techniques in OBS.
All right, let's do this. Let's see, I want the screen. All right, so as you're looking at it, this is just a fairly basic setup inside OBS. Right now, I am currently in my favorite way to work with this, which is called studio mode. So I can have what's happening on the left and what's happening on the right. Actually, I got some old residual changes here. Let's transition it. There we go. So we have both bits of information. By default, when you come in, it comes in just standard mode. So this is what's out there. This is what's live. Like I said, I like Studio because I can know what's coming up and ready to go. And then I can just hit the button and it moves over to the side. We have our scenes. I have created a fairly basic one, starting soon. When you're working with an event, something as basic as a starting soon screen and including a countdown, for example. Granted, you could be a lot more snazzier, get some images and get some stuff loaded in here to make it look to pop a little bit more. But even just a basic, hey, we're starting soon, lets people know, okay, yep, I'm in the right place, everything's working. As part of that as well, we can also include a source that is some background audio music. One of the things we found that helps a lot is if there's something animated on the screen, so countdown timer, something, and audio, music, that alleviates a lot of questions that people may ask, like, hey, is this working? Okay, is the audio on? Because a lot of the times people come into a meeting, that's the first thing they're trying to check. Say, okay, am I ready to go? Can I hear things? Yep, okay, things are updating. All right, I'm good to go. So definitely a cool thing to have in there. Plus also, hey, we're done. Thank you for attending is also a nice one. So we have our basic scene here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in, and as you can see, this is a list of the different scenes. I am going to throw on video capture device, and I'm just going to call it webcam. Oops, webcam. If I can type today. Okay, it's going to pick up. I can select which camera I want to work with. So in this particular case, my camera here, I'm going to go ahead and select. Hello, everybody. So we have the camera. This is picking up the other camera on my machine. If I tried picking the one that Teams is currently using, I'll get nothing. So we'll stick with this fairly basic one. There we go. Cool. So now with this, I can take it, I can drag it around, move it to wherever I want. I can resize it. I can also adjust it to say, hey, you know what? I don't want all this extra stuff in the background. I just want a smaller version of me. And I can put myself here. Fairly simple. Also, I want to throw on here, I want another video capture device. And this one is going to be screen. And I have this going through an actual capture card connected to my Google Chromecast for the moment. So for example, I can say, cool, throw that on here. And now you can notice my camera kind of disappeared. The way the sources are worked is they're stacked. So whichever one is on top will be on top. So if I size this down, I can see I'm still here. Or if I can just select this and just drag it up to the top. And now we're off and running and it covers over the top. So I can adjust things to say, hey, you know what? I don't want to fully cover the screen. We want to do a kind of a picture-in-picture style. And there we go. So now this content's ready to roll. I'm pulling in content wherever that could be from. It could be from an actual camera physical camera you have in the room. It could be from a console if you're doing some gaming streaming, for example, what have you. So there's a lot of no real limits there on what type of sources. Like this particular card, it's limited is just an HDMI input. So lots of really cool stuff there. Let's do a quick glance here, make sure we covered everything because we want to make sure we get into the cool stuff. So as far as getting this stuff into it, we can take, as I mentioned, with our starting soon, I'm just going to go ahead and just show this because I think this is one of the cool things. If I embed a scene, I can take my scene and throw it on top. But now it's part of my starting soon. So as I'm working with this, any changes I make on here to say, you know what, I'm going to move me over here, shift this over this way. And now if I go back to my starting soon, and everything took effect. So it's kind of a good way of getting the reuse to be able to make sure things are consistent and don't have to remember. It's like, oh, oops, I forgot to update that one scene. All right, integration options. We'll talk a little bit about this. And kind of want to make sure we have save some time for our other scenarios. One of the options that we talked about, as it says, the output is the virtual camera. So I can start this as a virtual camera. Let's go ahead and transition, just so we have something to show. If I start as a virtual camera, we're all good here. You guys don't really see anything. I can come in even on this webcam. I can come in and look, oh, look, OPS virtual camera. You guys ready for some inception to go on here? So we can now see it is seeing what I'm outputting. So same thing with Teams. I can come over to my Teams window and I can say, let's change this up a little bit. Instead of looking at my mug, we're going to change that. So now you are seeing, oh, when doing that, make sure you turn off background effects. None. I want nothing there and apply. There we go. See, starting soon. So if I wanted to, I can now transition and now you'll see it's mainly me. So the beauty of doing this is I can control all of the camera, all the content that gets fed to Teams through this application. So if I want to switch up fairly simply, just hit a button and say, okay, I want to switch to another camera, it's done. If I want to be able to throw in the lower third to be able to say, hey, this is Ryan, Senior Technology Consultant at Zillow, we could do that. We have Galen, we say, hey, this is the CEO of LionTech. We can include a lot of that extra pop without a whole lot of extra effort. So that part is definitely cool. So I'm going to, from there, go turn this off. We can record, we can stream. Also, one of the options is I can take this content. Oops, I killed my camera here. Now you guys are seeing the OBS logo. So let's go ahead and switch that back real quick. And that is that camera. And we can say back to our regularly scheduled background. There we go. So from here, I can also say I want to output this content to a screen. So it works really nice if you're doing Teams. If you say, hey, I want to share this as a desktop, I can say, hey, I want to take this. I want it to be a full screen projector, and I'm going to put it over the top of this particular window I'm sharing right now, just to show what the effect is, and then we can cancel it. So if I go ahead and select this, now OBS output is taking up this entire monitor. So if I want to share from Teams, I can now just say, hey, I want to select this monitor. And as you are all seeing, this is the content that is coming in through Teams, but it's coming through OBS to get into Teams. So definitely some cool stuff there, and I can just hit escape and it cancels back out of it. All right.
So some of the cool things, just to kind of highlight some of that, what we're doing with OBS is trying to show you some of the foundational components of OBS, and then in such a way so that if you were intending to level up your meetings or your live events, you really start to control all of the content and everything that's being consumed from you through OBS. So definitely spend some time with scenes, and the various sources in each scene so that you can kind of stack those on top of each other and make for an efficient use of presenting all of the content. And like I said, controlling it from within OBS to get that kind of polished, more professional production value.
Yeah, and one of the things Philip had mentioned, yeah, for if you want to spend some money, there are other tools beyond OBS. OBS is kind of one we've picked it because it's powerful and free. But along with that power does come some complexity. There's a little bit of a learning curve because it can do so much, and so there's just a lot of bells and whistles, a lot of options. There are other options, as mentioned, vMix. There's also Streamlabs OBS and a bunch of other different solutions. Yeah, there's a lot of things that'll do the same functionality. So in the end, pick what works out for what your use case is. If you're more comfortable with a fairly simple interface and you're not doing super advanced stuff, some other options will work. And a lot of these options aren't super expensive. Some of them are, but most of them are not. Most of them are affordable. They're a fairly basic price that you can take advantage of. All right, Gain, I'll let you take over the share again.
Okay, so we just went through quite a few things in that demo. Basic setup of OBS, what are sources, what are scenes, how do you manage those scenes, how do you reuse those scenes. We're going to talk about some integration options as we proceed into our pro tips and gotchas component of the session. So to begin talking about pro tips, we want to talk here about how do you give your attendees the best experience, right? And when you're in a specific scenario, what should you be doing? So Ryan, do you want to kick, or actually with Teams meetings and Teams webinars, we prefer to use screen share here versus any type of feed in from virtual cameras and those kind of things. Really, for Teams meetings and Teams webinars, screen sharing is simple and highly effective.
Yeah, and one of those questions we had earlier on in the comments is, okay, if you're sharing videos, what's the best way to do that? From what our experience has been, screen share works, but it's not the best if you have to share a video. Screen share is designed for sharing a screen. It'll do it, but the resolution and the update rates for a screen share is less than a virtual camera. But that being said, there are scenarios where a virtual camera just does not work. If you're talking a situation like this, I can say, hey, I want to use a virtual camera, and I'm going to go ahead and just to make sure everybody can see it, I'm going to come up and I'm going to spotlight myself. So now I am here, you can see me. The problem is currently that does not roll over to some other areas, and so it becomes a problem in some other aspects. So a lot of times you just have to see what, and I'll exit spotlight here, you have to see what works out best for those specific scenarios. Now, if we're talking live events, whether you're doing the live event with Stream or in Yammer with a virtual encoder, or even Teams with the external encoder option, the best option is just do an RTMP input, because you can take the output of OBS and feed it directly in. So you don't have the latency problems, you don't have any of that sort of stuff. It's all just a direct feed in, and you have the highest resolution possible. Some of the other options, if you're just doing a live event, you can do a virtual camera, super easy. And then you get the full fidelity video, you get the high resolution. Because if you think about it, video, a lot of us are moving a whole lot more than the content on the screen is changing right now. There's not much changing on here. It's fairly static content. So Teams has adapted to know that based off of normal use cases, the camera content needs a higher bit rate and higher quality because it has things that are moving and changing on a regular basis. Yeah, so we have Martin's kind of confirming the same thing as, yeah, that with using the virtual camera gets the best results, but not depending on your use case, not always the best option for it. And yes, we got some other resources to put out there. So thank you for sharing those.
All right. So continuing on with the pro tips, I think Ryan just covered basically all of our encoding RTMP kind of scenarios here. So moving on to pro tips. One thing and the most important thing is test. And then when you think everything's working, test it again. Doing timely tests as well. So if your event is going to be in the morning, or like you have a really important webinar that's going to happen in the morning, try to have all of your tech checks occur at the same time as the event. Make sure that if you have speakers coming in, that they're using the same gear that they're going to be using on the day of the event, that they're preferably in the location that they'll be when the event occurs, so that you can see how their lighting is, you can see how they sound. We can't tell you how many times we find that it's Tuesday at 10 a.m. and guess what? That's when the homeowners association in the neighborhood is doing all the maintenance on the lawns and stuff like that, right? So you hear mowers in the background and various things like that. So it's really good to test everything from an environmental perspective, but then of course from a tech perspective, so that you can figure out what is best for the type of videos you might be inputting into your session, and you can be mindful of lag. So, as we think about bandwidth, maybe Ryan, you can talk a little bit about that, and we can talk about bandwidth, lag, and maybe audio sync, and combine all of that into one.
Yeah, we can definitely combine those. So one thing as well, I know we talked about a way of kind of doing our own green room. So I was looking at, I was like, okay, going through our slides, like we don't really talk about it because it's one of those topics that in this presentation, there's not enough time to be able to do it. But essentially, what do we call that, Galen? I keep forgetting. We had a fun name that we came up for this. It was what was that?
Double teams.
That's right, double teams. So what it allows you to do is create your own green room, so you have your presenters joining into a Teams meeting that is not this meeting, and then you're feeding that content in through OBS through a screen share to be able to pull it in. So a kind of a simplified way of being able to, hey, you control 100% of the content. So if somebody has some weird situation where their microphone is going weird and we got some feedback, you can mute and unmute them as much as you need to, instead of having to wait for Teams to say, hey, Joe, can you come off mute? Joe, you there? So it just kind of allows you to be able to have full control of that situation. So it definitely gets some value. It's a little more complex in some of the setup, but it definitely comes in handy. But as long as, back to those lines, as far as talking about bandwidth, make sure you are aware of what your requirements are. In Teams, there is in the interface, if you click on the more, there's a nice little option for call health. This will tell you how much bandwidth you are currently taking up for content that you're sharing. So as you're going through it and you're doing a demo, you're working with this, you can see, okay, here's what the bit rate is, how much I'm taking up to be able to send out my video, to do my screen shares, do all this stuff. So that way you know, okay, here's what we're up against. Also, same thing with audio. A lot of times you have to keep in mind is for your event, do you have enough bandwidth, one, to share your content, to produce the event, plus two, do you have enough content, enough bandwidth for people to consume it? So if say you have a town hall meeting and you're sharing out, you're broadcasting your content, everything's good, but everybody else on your network is also on the same connection. So if they're trying to now go out to the internet to pull it back down again, it could cause some network problems. Also, some of those things to keep in mind: audio sync is one of those problems that you have to keep an eye on. In a lot of events that we've done, we kind of keep an eye, test audio, make sure things come across, everything's in sync. No matter what you do, there's almost always going to be inevitably some point where things just get out of sync. It happens, but you need to make sure you do everything you can to alleviate those headaches, because my wife is one of those people that she cannot watch a video if the audio is out of sync. So if I'm talking and my actual voice does not line up with the picture, it drives her nuts. So it's definitely one of those things you want to keep an eye on, because it will irritate and drive people away, and that's not what you want to do.
And there are some settings in OBS to help with audio sync issues, right? So these are kind of, advanced settings that are back in when we think about OBS being open source. There's a ton of settings. There's a lot of screens. So there are definitely some settings in there that can help out with that. And one final thing around being mindful of bandwidth. I have one client right now who all of their various branch offices in a region that they are located, all of their internet traffic from those branch offices all kind of hairpins back, kind of hub and spoke back through their corporate office. And so when they have some webinar style events for the entire enterprise, that scenario that Ryan spoke about where everybody's sharing that internet connection, wow, we can really saturate that network whenever we're sharing videos and doing all of those type of things. So something to definitely be mindful of and to rehearse. So one of the things, go ahead.
We do have a comment as well that's along those same lines. A solution, if you're doing live events, Microsoft is aware of this. They have partnered with some eCDNs that are designed just for that purpose, where it says, hey, one connection out to the internet to pull the content. So there are ways around that, but you just kind of take some forethought, but that's why we kind of mentioned as a be mindful of it and test that situation. Say, hey, what's it look like? Is our network able to handle this? Can our firewall handle this much outgoing traffic all at once? I had one company I worked for that they're trying to do this. They set things up, and it pounded their firewall to the point where it just shut it down. And so all internet for the entire campus went down just because one event was going on. So definitely something that it'd be mindful. If you're responsible for that and your company makes money based off of your connection to the internet, that's not going to look good on your performance review to say, hey, yeah, we stopped the company from making any money for 10 minutes.
Yeah, and keep in mind, a lot of times if you're working in advance with the network team, that there's various rules that can be set up to optimize traffic for your presenters and things like that. So there's ways around it that might not require an investment in re-architecting your network or purchasing CDN capability. So that's a great option, especially if you do this often, right? That being said, when you go to test and you're thinking about all of these things, have a run of show. Like, think about what the plan is for the session that you're about to deliver. Who's going to be speaking? How long are they going to speak? What are the transitions back and forth? And make sure that you're rehearsing that so everybody feels comfortable with it, and not just the primary speakers, but those backup presenters, right? Or backup producers. Nowadays, with COVID, all of the events that I do, we have backups for everyone, because if somebody comes down with COVID, there's laws where they might have to work remotely, or maybe they can't work at all, and then it changes everything, right? So you want to make sure you incorporate those scenarios into your run of show and your testing.
Yeah, I know we're kind of running low on time. It's supposed to be 40 minutes because we'll kind of blaze through since we've been doing some questions as we've gone throughout. Some high level. So green screens, if you're doing a professional experience, you want to do full background removal. It definitely is helpful. As you see, Teams does a pretty good job of doing removal, other than like there's little spots in between things if you're wearing headphones or whatever. Along those same lines as well, lighting is crucial whether you're doing a green screen or not. If you don't want the situation where somebody's washed out, they can't see them very well. Mine, I've got natural sunlight because I've got a window right in front of me. I know Galen's got lights in front of him. One of the things to keep in mind as well, whether you're using a green screen or not, you want front lit up and behind lit up. And the reason you want it behind is the behind gives you the contrast. So whatever you're working with can crop you out easily enough.
All right. We'll hit the gotchas, and then I think we'll have a time to come back to the question, because that's a good question. Yep. And we'll come right back to it in just a moment. But from a gotchas perspective, I think the gotcha that Ryan started to highlight early on in his demo was around spotlighting, right? And this is huge. If you use spotlighting or it becomes part of your run of show and you're recording a meeting like today's, it's important to understand what spotlighting will and will not do in the recording. So if the recording is important for you, then be mindful of spotlighting, because basically spotlighting doesn't work in the recording. And that's the big takeaway here. And so like I said, scenario-based preparedness, right? That's what this is addressing.
Yep. Yeah, because like I said, just definitely make sure this would be identified as part of your testing situation too. Make sure you test what gets recorded and test a recording, test your transcription, test anything that matters to you. Make sure you've at least looked at it and verified that things are working out properly. I know Philip's got his question here, using NDI in Teams. The biggest problem to get NDI output from PowerPoint live sharing and no problem. Yeah, so well, from my experience working with NDI, is it works really well if the content you're trying to share is not from your main machine, your machine. So if you're the machine that's broadcasting over NDI and you want to share your screen, it doesn't work. It will not pick up that content. But if you have somebody else sharing the screen, and then you can feed that out to it just fine. So I'm not sure exactly why or if that is the case. I think Microsoft may be working on it, but that is just one thing to keep in mind is as you're doing that, because as part of one of the demos as Galen and I were preparing for the session, we were going to use our double teams functionality for this session. And in the preparation, in the testing beforehand, we identified that particular content was not coming through. I could see me, I could see Galen, but the screens were not coming through no matter what we did. And so I tried it to a different machine, broadcasted that, and it came up. So it just became very complex to be able to do that with requiring 3 different machines to accomplish this functionality. I was like, okay, in our scenario, not quite right, doesn't quite meet what we needed to. So this kind of we're talking about it situation works a lot simpler, but that is just one thing to keep in mind is that if you're broadcasting from one machine currently, it does not include your desktop that you're sharing. I did see some thumbs up. Is there any further questions along those lines? Silence.
All right.
Okay, yeah. I think we've been given the hook. It's time to say goodbye.
Yeah. But thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the time, and we hope you have a great conference today. Here's some of the socials that you can reach Ryan and I at. Feel free to ping us with any questions.